Okay, so yesterday, I did a video yesterday morning actually, where I gave my thoughts on what happened in the YWC, the IWC, when it comes to JD from NY to, when it comes to, well, almost got tongue tied there, but when it came to JD from NY206, who is also a play by play announcer commentator for the New York based mid independent promotion House of Glory, along with Jason Solomon, who is also known for Solomonster Sounds Off. Now, the reason I talked about this incident is because on Friday there was a vignette after a match that involved Asuka and Bianca Belair, and we had Charlotte Flair, get involved, as well as we had Damage Control members Bayley and Io Sky get involved. And what happened is that as Io and Bayley were going back up the ramp, we saw this vignette come on the screen of Shotzi Blackheart. And Shotzi decided to shave off her iconic green hair that she's had since she began. She's decided to shave it off completely. Now, a lot of folks, like JD, assumed that this was a Vince McMahon call. That this was just Vince McMahon trying to degrade, someone like Shotzi Blackheart. Even though Shotzi kind of has a lot of what Vince would want from a character gimmicky perspective. But that wasn't the case. In actuality, yes, her shaving her head on Smackdown, is to play into her feud rivalry with Bayley, Io Sky, Damage Control as a whole. Yes, it is to play into that. But in reality, outside of the ring, she did it because her sister is battling cancer, and she's going through chemo to try to cure that cancer from her body or put it into remission. And all prayers and everything to her sister and her family during this time. But that is what's going on. She is basically shaving her head, or did shave her head, not because Vince McMahon ordered her to, because, I feel like it's going to make you better and I want control. No. She did it in support of her sister. And like I said in the original video yesterday morning, this is something that WWE, allowed to happen because it plays into the storyline, but also from a publicity standpoint, it gets them a lot of good publicity. In other words, it gets them on everybody's good side, even those that might be negative about them. If they allow a wrestler to do this in support of their family member going through this situation like Shotzi is doing for her sister. Now, the reason I did the video yesterday, and the reason right now it's up to over 50 views, which I do thank you for. It may not seem like it's much, but I do thank you for, that and everything. In the past day or so, I think it's been how many hours according to this? 22 hours. Probably going to be a day by the time you watch this. But the reason I did the video is because on Friday night on Twitter, JD went out and said something that pretty much has come back and bit him in the rear end. That's right, it bit him in the rear end. Because basically, JD called this, as I mentioned earlier, a Vince McMahon move. JD from NY206 called this a Vince McMahon move, not realizing the actual truth behind it. Not realizing the actual truth behind it. And what's crazy is others that felt the same way, after they read the whole context of the situation, took back what they said. Now, true, they don't believe that even with this change, either of the women in the entire women's division is going to get an opportunity to really shine and be built around. But there are those that, even though they feel that way, took back the belief that it was a Vince McMahon call. JD, unfortunately, I don't know if he did apologize last night during his collision review with with Jesse, Heel Jesse at Chi-Town Mark on Twitter. I don't know if he apologized for what he said, but yeah, JD has been getting it from all angles. He's been getting it from all angles, and it doesn't matter if you support JD or not. Even those that support him are bashing him for what he said. I wouldn't necessarily say bashing him, but basically they are getting on his case of what he said. Basically, calling him out for saying, basically saying and assuming it's a Vince McMahon call, when in reality it's not. It was actually of her own choosing. They're just incorporating it into the storyline that she's going to potentially have with Bayley and Damage Control. And I said in the original video that and the title of my video says it best, I had a feeling this was going to happen. Because you see, it's almost like people like JD, and I support JD, I respect what he does. He has his own opinions, very, very open-minded opinions, there's no doubt about that. But, I had a feeling something like this was going to happen because JD, just Alex of ALYX'S World, Solo Monster, Greg Morgan of Good Mic Work, Brian Zane of Wrestling with Regret, and anybody else, A&B Combos, BC Amplifier, you name it, all of them, basically, anytime they see something that reminds them of Vince, will call out Vince. They will say, it's Vince McMahon that made the call. It's Vince McMahon that did this. It's Vince McMahon that did that. Or it's Bruce Pritchard that did this on the behest of Vince and da-da-da. Or Triple H had to do this because Vince wouldn't leave him alone, so he had to do a Vince thing. It's like they don't realize that the more they assume that eventually it was going to catch up to them and make them look, humiliated, make them look embarrassed. And that's exactly what happened here. JD, basically getting it from all sides, even those that support him, made himself look humiliated. He made himself look embarrassed because of the fact that he didn't read into the context. He didn't read into the context. And that's what you need to do from here on in. You need to be like, hey, it seems like it's Vince McMahon, but let me double check. Let me make sure I get my facts straight. Because if not, you make yourself look like a goofball. And I say that with all due respect, no offense to JD or anybody else, but you make yourself look like a goofball. And the thing is, if you don't want that to happen, you should be like, okay, why did she shave her head? Let me double check. And if you find out, oh, she did it for this reason, then you'll be like, okay, I'm not going to blame it on Vince. It may seem like a Vince move, but I'm not going to blame it on Vince. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. And what happened? He got bombarded. Alex talked about it. Alex, like I mentioned in the original video, and I'll mention here, I mentioned it moments ago, but I'll mention it again. He took back what he said. I'm sure Solo Monster, when he did his review of Smackdown and may even mention it on the podcast, or may have mentioned it on his podcast today, I'm sure he took back his belief it was Vince that did this, that came up with her to shave her head and all that. I get, okay, what am I trying to, I see them, I can see people like Solo Monster, like I mentioned, like Alex, taking back what they said. And again, I don't know if he did it on his Smackdown review or he's going to do some more, or on his podcast today, whatever the case may be. I can see someone like Solo Monster taking it back and realizing, oops, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have assumed. And this is why, honestly, if I'm going to be honest with you, and I say it with all due respect, if I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not saying this to kiss up or anything, okay? But I have noticed that Jason Solomon has been more understanding. He has been more accepting of, okay, this may have seemed like it's a Vince move, but how do I know it's really Vince? Let me double, triple check. At least he's been doing that. He has been doing that, and it's been beneficial to him in the long run because people trust him more than they trust, JD or even Alex. Because instead of being unbiased the way, Salamanca seems to be, to them, people like JD and Alex are more AEW, butt kissers, Tony Khan butt kissers and all that, than they are than being unbiased like they say they are. And it's because of that belief and the way they see these things, the way they view them, if you will, the way they see them and they view them, is, why they're getting on people like JD's case for assuming something was Vince, or Vince's idea, and it wasn't. So hopefully, like I said in the original video, and I'll say it here again, hopefully JD has taken responsibility for his actions and has come out and apologized. I mean, I know when he gives an opinion, even if he's wrong about it, he's unapologetic. He will admit when he's wrong, but most of the time he's unapologetic. But if I'm JD, hopefully, if I'm him, I've made my decision, of going out off the script today, if he does one, or online or whatever, and saying, look, I made a mistake, I goofed, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have believed that. And then maybe finally just acknowledge, look, all the things, or basically finally acknowledge what I'm trying to say, the fact that the reason he thought it was Vince, and he shouldn't have, is because of all the times Vince has screwed up WWE, that it takes only something like, Shotzi shaving her head, shaving off her iconic green hair, for him to think it's instantly Vince without checking the facts. So, yeah, again, if I'm JD, I swallow my pride, and I acknowledge, okay, I made a mistake. I goofed up. I shouldn't have done that. That was my fault. I take responsibility. That's what he should do. And hopefully he has. Because again, this is why people look at him as being a biased, AEW ass kisser, excuse my language, God. And, the same way they see someone like Alex. Because they don't check the facts. And this is why they prefer, believe it or not, if you would have asked anybody out there, this is why they prefer Salamanca over there. This is why. So hopefully JD, like I mentioned in the original video, and I'm mentioning it here because apparently people couldn't really hear me that well in that video. Again, and the reason for that, like I mentioned, guys, is because I was, doing it early. My mom was still asleep, so I wanted to be quiet. I couldn't be as loud as I am now, so you could truly hear me, But anyway, like I said in the original video, hopefully he has swallowed his pride and, admitted his mistake, because, again, this is not a good look for him. And by extension, it's not a good look for the IWC or the YWC and those that do this for a living or a partial living here on YouTube. It's not a good look. It's not a good look. I mean, let's be honest. How would you feel if, let's say, Linkara came out and talked about this upcoming comic that's written by a writer he doesn't like, and because it's written by a writer, he's going to assume it's crap, but then gets proven wrong. How do you think that makes Linkara look? And on behalf of Linkara, how do you think it makes all the other comic book writers, or not writers, but reviewers look here on YouTube? Doesn't make them look good, does it? And that's what's gone on here with JD. JD basically needs to swallow his pride and admit he made a mistake. Once he admits he made a mistake, and then basically admits that it's because of what Vince has done in the past that's made him think this way, people will get off his case, and all he has to do as well is make a promise to not assume, but to check his facts from here on in. But anyway, though, guys, I just wanted to do this little bit of a more clearer volume, louder